You have spent your life operating under a fundamental delusion. You believe your intellect is a tool designed to find the truth. You believe that your capacity for logic, your ability to process complex information, places you above the primitive errors of average minds. You are incorrect. Your intelligence is not a beacon of light. It is a sophisticated defense mechanism. It is an architect, and its only client is your fragile ego. When an ordinary mind makes a mistake, the error is naked, the failure is obvious, blunt, and impossible to ignore. The feedback loop of reality forces a confrontation. They touch the fire, they burn, they learn. But your mind works differently. Your tragedy is your vocabulary. Your curse is your processing speed. You do not fail less often than anyone else. You simply explain your failures with better words. Think about the last time you made a catastrophic error in judgment, a fractured relationship, a terrible financial calculation, a severe misreading of another human being. Did you sit in the uncomfortable silence of your own incompetence? No, your brain immediately went to work. The cognitive machinery powered up. Before the sting of reality could even penetrate your skin, your high IQ was already building an elaborate fortress of rationalization around the event. You gathered data, you manipulated variables, you constructed a timeline that proved inevitably that you were the victim of circumstance, or that the other person was flawed, or that the market was irrational. You weaponized your intelligence to transform a blatant failure into a logical triumph. You convinced yourself that you were right, even as the ashes of your decision fell around you. This is the intelligence curse. The smarter you are, the more capable you become of constructing narratives that justify your own dysfunction. You do not use your mind to adapt to reality. You use your mind to distort reality until it fits your preferred narrative. There is a term for this: intellectual vanity. It is the quiet, arrogant assumption that because you can articulate a problem flawlessly, you have somehow solved it. You mistake analysis for action. You mistake comprehension for growth. You sit in rooms or in isolation, dissecting the behavior of others. You map out their psychological flaws with surgical precision. You feel a cold sense of superiority because you understand the mechanics of their foolishness. But turn that scalpel inward and the machinery freezes. Your intelligence creates a massive, impenetrable blind spot for self-correction, because to correct oneself requires a deeply humiliating admission. I was wrong. My logic was flawed. My intellect did not save me. Your ego cannot tolerate that admission, so it outsources the problem to your intellect. It demands an alibi, and your brilliant, high-functioning brain provides one every single time. It builds a fortress so tall that you cannot even see the ground you are failing to stand on. You prioritize being right over being better. You choose the comfort of a flawless argument over the brutal friction of actual change. You are paralyzed, not by a lack of capacity, but by an overabundance of justification. Your mind has become a prison of perfect logic, keeping you locked inside your own behavioral loops. Let us examine the anatomy of your daily self-deception. It begins with a microscopic crack in your reality. A moment where your actions do not yield the outcome you predicted. A failure for a fraction of a second. The truth registers. You feel the cold spike of inadequacy. Your ego detects a fatal threat, but you do not linger there. You cannot afford to. Instead, your mind activates its most powerful asset, the internal public relations firm. Your intellect steps in to manage the crisis. Its job is not to discover what went wrong. Its job is to protect the asset, and the asset is your carefully constructed self-image. You believe your thoughts are the steering wheel of your life. They are not. Your conscious thoughts are merely the rearview mirror. They exist solely to justify where the vehicle has already crashed. You make decisions based on deeply buried emotional deficits, fear, insecurity, a desperate need for control, a profound terror of vulnerability. These are the invisible hands moving the pieces on your board, but you never admit this. You drape these raw, primitive drives in the elegant, tailored clothing of logic. You do not isolate yourself because you are afraid of rejection. You isolate yourself because you have high standards and refuse to engage in trivial social rituals. You do not quit projects because you fear failure. You quit because the project no longer aligns with your macro-level strategy. You do not sabotage relationships because you are terrified of intimacy. You dismantle them because your partner displayed incompatible psychological attachment styles. Do you see the mechanism? You use academic terminology to sanitize your cowardice. You use psychological jargon to build a sterile wall between yourself and your own toxicity. This is the darkest form of human behavior. Not physical violence, not overt malice. It is the quiet, systematic, and highly intelligent falsification of your own reality. Let us look at the concept of the intellectual alibi. The average person commits a wrong and feels guilt. They are burdened by the undeniable weight of their action. The highly intelligent person commits a wrong and immediately drafts a legally binding document in their mind, proving why the wrong was actually a necessary, perhaps even noble, right? You convince yourself that your cruelty was actually radical honesty. You relabel your manipulation as strategic influence. You categorize your apathy as stoic detachment. Every vice is rebranded as a virtue. Every failure is repackaged as a misunderstood success. Your brain is a master counterfeiter. It prints fake currency, fake reasons, fake justifications, and you have been spending this fake currency your entire life, wondering why you still feel deeply and permanently bankrupt. Because of this strategy, you have become an expert at playing defense, but you call it playing chess. And this strategy demands a heavy toll. It requires absolute isolation to maintain this fortress of rationalization. You must slowly eliminate anyone who threatens the narrative. When someone points out your inconsistency, your intellect immediately goes on the offensive. You do not listen. You analyze their delivery. You find a logical fallacy in their argument. You attack their credibility. You win the debate, and you lose the connection. You are left standing alone in a perfectly constructed room of your own design, a room where you are never wrong, a room where you are completely, suffocatingly isolated. You mistake this isolation for silent strength. You look out at the world and convince yourself that you are alone because you are operating on a higher frequency. You tell yourself that the masses are simply too irrational, too emotional, too flawed to comprehend your depth. This is the ultimate intellectual anesthetic. It numbs the pain of your loneliness by replacing it with a quiet, tragic arrogance. You possess a dangerous mutation. Your self-awareness is fake. You have read the books. You know the theories. You can easily diagnose your own neuroses. You will sit in a chair and calmly state, "I know I have a problem with control," or "I know I possess avoidant tendencies." You think this admission is progress. It is not. It is a preemptive strike. By declaring your flaws out loud, you believe you immunize yourself against them. You use self-deprecation not as a tool for change, but as a shield against criticism. If you have already analyzed your own darkness, no external observer can use it against you. You have turned self-awareness into a spectator sport. You sit in the bleachers of your own mind, providing brilliant, articulate commentary on the destruction of your own life, but you never step onto the field to stop the game. Let us observe a case study, a practical application of this cognitive machinery. We will look at an anonymous life, but as you listen, you will recognize the blueprint. Imagine an individual, highly capable, analytically superior. They enter into a dynamic with another human being, a relationship that requires the surrender of control. For a time, the intellect is entertained, the mental stimulation is sufficient, the variables are manageable. But eventually, the inevitable occurs. Conflict arises. The partner voices a grievance. They point out a blind spot in our subject's behavior, a lack of presence, a subtle selfishness, a failure to connect on a human level. This is a critical juncture, a moment that requires a deeply uncomfortable primitive emotion, accountability. But for the hyper-rational mind, accountability feels like ego death, so the defense protocol initiates. The subject does not listen to the pain in their partner's voice. They listen for structural weaknesses in their partner's argument. They detect an exaggerated word, a slight misrepresentation of a past timeline, an emotional fluctuation. They lock onto these flaws, they deploy their vocabulary. They do not respond to the feeling, they cross-examine the delivery. They dismantle the partner's narrative piece by piece. They use logic as a scalpel, cutting away the emotional core of the complaint, until only a skeletal, easily disprovable statement remains. They win the argument. They are factually, objectively, undeniably correct about the minor details, and they lose the person. The partner withdraws. The connection is severed. Now, the subject is alone. The silence of the room should be deafening. The regret should be agonizing. But the intellect does not allow for agony. It immediately begins drafting the final report. The rationalization engine runs at maximum capacity. They were too volatile. They could not communicate rationally. Our cognitive baselines were ultimately incompatible. I have preserved my boundaries. I have protected my peace. It is a masterpiece of self-deception. The subject has successfully rebranded their own emotional cowardice as intellectual superiority. They feel a cold, hollow sense of victory. They are mathematically correct and completely empty. This pattern does not confine itself to intimacy. It infects every arena of existence. Observe the same individual in their professional environment. They are passed over for an advancement. A project fails. A business venture collapses. Reality has delivered a verdict. Their approach was inadequate, but the intellect intercepts the verdict before it reaches the ego. The failure is never internalized as a lack of competence. It is externalized as a systemic flaw. The management is short-sighted. The market is saturated with mediocrity. I refuse to engage in the primitive politics required to succeed here. Do you hear the machinery? Do you hear the precise, elegant hum of the intelligence curse? It takes massive cognitive horsepower. To generate excuses this convincing, an average mind would simply admit defeat. They would say, "I miscalculated." But your mind is too advanced for such simple truths. Your mind requires an elaborate conspiracy in which you are the tragic, misunderstood observer, and the world is a collective of inferior actors who fail to recognize your value. Let us examine the concept of strength. You perceive your ability to detach as a form of power. When a situation becomes emotionally turbulent, you sever the cord. You retreat into analysis. You watch the chaos from a safe, sterile distance. You call this composure. You call this stoicism. It is neither. True strength is the capacity to remain in the fire, to feel the burn of your own inadequacy, and resist the urge to explain it away. Your detachment is a flight response, dressed up as a superpower. You are running away. You are just doing it at the speed of thought. The tragedy is that society rewards this behavior. You are praised for your objective analysis. You are admired for your cool head under pressure. This external validation reinforces the internal prison. Every compliment you receive for your intellect is another brick added to the fortress wall. You become a monument to your own coping mechanisms, cold, impressive, completely hollow inside. You analyze people like subjects in an experiment, because treating them like equals would require you to be vulnerable. You keep everyone at an arm's length, carefully measuring their utility against the risk they pose to your equilibrium. And when they inevitably fail your impossibly rigid, uncommunicated tests, you discard them with clinical precision. You do not mourn the loss, you simply update the dataset. We must now transition from observation to confrontation. Let us establish a few absolute truths. Truths your intellect has spent decades desperately trying to suppress. Truth number one: you are not actually afraid of being wrong. You are terrified of being perceived as ordinary. Your identity is entirely tethered to your cognitive superiority. If you admit a simple, foolish, average mistake, you lose the only leverage you believe you possess. You would rather be an isolated, misunderstood genius than a flawed, connected human being. Truth number two: your obsession with being right has completely paralyzed your capacity to be better. To be better requires a starting point of inadequacy. It requires an empty cup, but your cup is always full. It is overflowing with justifications, hypotheses, and defensive strategies. There is no room for new data. If you have already concluded that you possess all the answers when you prioritize being right, you enter a state of permanent litigation. Every conversation is a courtroom. Every relationship is a negotiation of terms. Every failure is a verdict. That must be aggressively appealed. You exhaust yourself defending a version of yourself that does not actually exist. You think this makes you formidable. It actually makes you incredibly fragile. A mind that must constantly prove its own perfection is a mind living in constant terror of exposure. Think about the exhaustion, the sheer caloric expenditure of maintaining this illusion, to constantly monitor your environment, to constantly scan for threats to your intellect, to never ever allow yourself the profound luxury of saying, "I do not know, I do not know." 4 words that terrify you. 4 words that could instantly liberate you, but your programming forbids them. If you do not know, you are vulnerable. If you do not know, you are ordinary. So you invent an answer. You construct a highly plausible theory and present it as fact. You lie to the world, and worse, you lie to the mirror. Look at the landscape of your current existence. The projects you have abandoned, the people you have discarded, the risks you have meticulously calculated out of your life. You did not avoid these things because they were inherently flawed. You avoided them because they introduced variables you could not control. They introduced the mathematical probability of a mistake, and your ego cannot tolerate the math. So, you choose inaction, but you do not call it inaction. You call it strategic patience. You call it waiting for optimal conditions. You use your high IQ to build an airtight, completely logical argument for why you should do absolutely nothing. You simulate life instead of living it. You run the scenarios in your head. You anticipate the conflicts. You script the resolutions. You solve the entire problem in the sterile environment of your own mind. And because you have solved it theoretically, you feel a false sense of accomplishment. You feel no need to execute it in reality. Why build the structure and risk a collapse when you can just perfect the blueprint? This is the ultimate trap of intellectual vanity. You are trapped in the blueprint. You have a flawless design for a life you are not actually actually living. And as the years pass, the blueprint becomes heavier. The gap between your theoretical capacity and your actual output widens. You sit and watch people with half your intellect build tangible, flawed, physical things. You watch them make primitive mistakes, learn from them, and move forward. And what do? You critique them. You point out the structural flaws in their attempts. You dismantle their efforts with your sharp, precise vocabulary. You sit in the safety of your unexecuted potential and judge those who have dared to enter the arena. You mistake your ability to criticize the game for the ability to play it. A critic is just a coward with an excellent vocabulary, and your intelligence has turned you into the harshest, most paralyzed critic of your own existence. You are not growing. You are simply getting better at defending your current state of stagnation. Every book you read, every concept you master is just another weapon added to your defensive arsenal. You do not consume knowledge to transform. You consume knowledge to fortify. You have convinced yourself that your intellect is a sword you use to cut through the noise of the world. But look closer. It is not a sword. It is a shield, a massive, heavy, impenetrable shield. And you have been hiding behind it for so long, you have forgotten what it feels like to stand in the open. The time for theory has expired. The blueprint must be burned. You have spent your entire existence accumulating intellectual capital to ensure you never have to feel the sting of inadequacy. You have built a fortress so secure that not even reality can breach its walls. But a fortress is just a prison, viewed from the inside. Let us define what actual power looks like. Your current concept of strength is loud, not in volume, but in cognitive noise. It is a constant, exhausting, internal monologue of justification. It is the endless generation of alibis. True silent strength is the permanent cessation of that monologue. It is the quiet, terrifying act of stepping out from behind your vocabulary. Imagine a version of yourself that no longer requires the title of the smartest person in the room. A version of yourself that can commit a catastrophic error. Look at the wreckage and simply state, "I broke this because I was inadequate." No academic jargon, no psychological deflection, no strategic rebranding of the narrative. Just the cold, heavy, undeniable weight of your own flaw. This is the only escape from the intelligence curse. You must willingly dismantle the sophisticated cognitive machinery that has kept you safe and entirely stagnant for your entire adult life. You must actively, deliberately choose to look foolish. Your ego will violently resist this. It will flood your nervous system with 1,000 brilliant logical reasons why this surrender is dangerous, irrational, and beneath your capabilities. It will tell you that to admit absolute fault is to lose your identity. Let it panic. Observe the desperation of your own intellect as it loses its absolute authority over your actions. Watch as it tries to convince you that vulnerability is a mathematical error. Acknowledge the hypothesis and then discard it. You do not need to consume another book. You do not need to master another psychological framework. You do not need another profound, abstract realization to add to your sterile collection of theories. You need to fail, and for the first time in your life, you need to let it hurt. Without explaining why it shouldn't, you must strip away the sophisticated armor of rationalization. You must stand completely exposed in the harsh wind of your own incompetence. Because until you accept that your intellect cannot save you from your fundamental humanity, you will remain exactly where you are. A brilliant, exceptional mind meticulously documenting its own slow, inevitable starvation. You are not a deity observing the human condition from a sterile balcony. You are in the dirt. Your high IQ does not exempt you from the brutal friction of growth. It merely makes your refusal to grow more articulate. The era of the intellectual alibi is over. The counterfeit currency of your justifications has lost its value. The next time reality shatters, your perfectly calculated expectations. Do not analyze the variables. Do not draft the defense. Do not retreat into the architecture of your mind. Sit in the absolute silence of your failure. Let the illusion of your superiority dissolve. You can continue to be perfectly right, or you can finally begin to be real. The era of the intellectual alibi is over. The counterfeit currency of your justifications has lost its value. The next time reality shatters, your perfectly calculated expectations. Do not analyze the variables. Do not draft the defense. Do not retreat into the architecture of your mind. Sit in the absolute silence of your failure. Let the illusion of your superiority dissolve. You can continue to be perfectly right, or you can finally begin to be real.